is Hussein Askari. I'm an economic and strategic analyst. I specialize in West Asia and Africa affairs. I am the author of this book, co-author of this book called Extending the New Silk Road to West Asia and Africa, where I discuss many of the issues that actually are already taken up today by Their Excellencies, the diplomatic representatives from Africa, but it also represents the vision for the future of Africa. The Belt and Road, as we have heard today, is no longer just a concept or an idea. It has created a new paradigm in economic relations in the world. It's changing many aspects of the international economic order. It has become a force for change, a positive change all over the world. It's not simply these corridors, original corridors, which were announced by President Xi Jinping in 2013. Now it's expanding to Africa, South America, and even to Western Europe. So that's something which is we should not be missing. I'm not here today to cheer the African-Chinese cooperation. As we heard, they can take care of themselves. Our problem here, and my colleagues and I, we are Swedish citizens. China's priority is China's interests. Africa's priorities are Africa's interests. And we in Sweden also have to think the same way. However, there is no conflict or contradiction between our interests if we can harmonize them, if we can find common ground for cooperation. Rather than looking for new enemies in China, Russia, Iran, or anywhere else in the world, we in Sweden and in Europe, we should find common ground with other nations. We have very deep economic and social problems in Sweden and in Europe today. And our interest would be best served by joining the Belt and Road initiative, joining hands with Africa, with China and other nations who want to be part of the new paradigm. Part of that, we have also to change Swedish attitude towards Africa. We have a good lesson from learning from China. Africa, in the minds of Europeans and Americans, is a place where there's problems. Africa is a big problem. All the reporting is about the epidemics, the civil wars, the corruption, and so on, and famine, the water shortage. That's what we know about Africa. It's a big problem. We can only help Africa. And I will come to that, which is another problem. China sees Africa's problems as an opportunity because that's the best place to start. We have heard today a lot about Africa's enormous potential, and that's what China has realized, as I will explain. But what China is doing is not helping Africa. China is empowering Africa by providing the tools which Africans need to use their resources in the best way possible. And it serves China's interest at the same time. Completely legitimate interests. Now, one of the problems we have, of course, is that the attitudes towards Africa, this was the Economist, it's the most prominent financial economic paper in Europe. The hopeless continent, that was in 2000. And then we have 2011, Africa is rising. And then we have 2013, when the Belt and Road Initiative is setting a base, is the aspiring Africa. The issue is that the Economist in the 2000 issue said, does Africa have some inherent character flaw that keeps it backward and incapable of development? That there's something wrong with Africans. That's why Africa is backward. I think there is something an inherent character flaw in the economists themselves. Because what the Economist is basing its prognosis on about Africa is not on the economic development which is taking place, but it's on the idea that wealth is raw materials. Raw materials is the source of wealth. Unfortunately, many Africans are infected by that problem. They say, we have all the resources we need. We don't need anyone else. The problem is that made Africa a hostage to fluctuations in the price of commodities. Africa's total reliance on exporting raw materials have made it hostage to changes in the prices, and therefore economic development has followed. In the first decade after independence in Africa, in the brown color, we have actually decent economic growth. We also had an international financial system which was stable, which allowed African nations and other nations to develop. But since the 71, when the Bretton Woods system was decoupled, or the dollar was decoupled from gold, and then we had the oil crisis in 73, things went wrong. And the fluctuations in Africa's, or sub-Saharan Africa's development has followed the fluctuations in the price of commodities, because Africa's only source of wealth was exporting raw material. So that's something which has to change, because raw materials are just a rock in the ground, okay? The true economic value is how you turn that piece of rock into something useful for society. And to do that, you need tools. You need tools, just energy, machinery, skilled labor, and so on and so forth. The other problem we have in the attitude of Europe and the industrialized world is this question of economic development. Now, the developing nations and China fought very hard in the United Nations to make sure that the goals of development, they have priorities. Number one, elimination of poverty. Number two, elimination of hunger, healthcare, education, equality, clean water, energy, industrialization, urbanization. All these are the priorities of the developing nations. The problem is, in Europe and the United States, we think number 13, climate action, should be the priority. All these other things can wait, because if we don't solve the climate problem, we will not achieve these, which is not true. At the UN General Assembly meeting in September, which was supposed to deal with these issues, we had people, young people, sent into the streets stirring a massive hysteria about climate change, so the whole discussion was changed from these priorities to these priorities. And that's a big problem we have in dealing with the developing nations. The developing nations and China think these are the priorities. This will follow. Now, we have now institutions in Sweden and in Europe. I call this the sustainable development acrobatics. They are turning the whole thing upside down by making very, very complex models of development which are completely dependent on the question of climate change. So they did it in a way so complex that number one ends up here. Number two, number three, number four, number five. So number 13 and 14 and 17 suddenly end up over here. It's in the perception of the individuals, the people in Europe and the United States, that these are the priorities of the world. And that's not true. Our priority is to eliminate poverty, hunger, provide decent living conditions, clean water, electricity, education, and so forth for the mass people. In Europe, we do have these things. So these are not a goal anymore, although we have problems with education and healthcare and infrastructure. So the other issue is we have a problem. Europe's attitude to Africa is we can help Africa with aid programs. And this, according to me, has made poverty permanent. You can provide clean water, as this EU project says, to these people. That's nice. But they have no electricity. There is no transport. These ladies have to take these heavy tankers for kilometers back home. Why not bring this water to the houses of these ladies? And then we have billions and billions of dollars and euros spent on these programs. And it's funny, they say here, we are using European know-how and new technologies for water purification. Have you ever seen Swedish or German women using this European know-how in Stockholm or in Berlin? They say this is good for Africans, this is not good for us. We have a different system. This is a problem. We have to change this and have a new attitude. Now we have the old, here's the colonial system of extracting raw materials from Africa and shipping them as quick as possible to the ports for outside. This is the vision of the African nations. We heard today His Excellency Ambassador of Egypt and the other speakers that we have now the African Union free trade zone, which is a fantastic development. However, without infrastructure, you cannot have trade. Trade among African nations, among themselves, is only 13% of all African trade with the world. Like Egypt and Sudan, who are neighbors, trade between them is only 1.5% of their trade with the outside world. Why? Because there is no infrastructure connection. This is a World Bank study from 2006, which says even if you just upgrade the existing roads, the bad roads, if you upgrade them a little bit, you'll have increase in trade between African nations between 250 and 1,000%, only by doing this small thing. Okay, so why is China so interesting for African nations? We heard today African nations want to work with China, and that problem is that we're going to miss this opportunity if we don't change our attitude. This is from the Forum on Economic Cooperation, China-Africa Economic Cooperation in Beijing last year. We had almost all African leaders were there. Only half of them then went to the General Assembly meeting because they didn't think that's a priority. This is a priority. Now, the reason China is interesting for Africa is there are many issues, but the important thing is that China has proven as a developing nation that you can actually quickly get out of poverty, hunger, and build an advanced economic system. And also, China has no strings attached to its cooperation with Africa. China does not propose to African nations to change their political systems, their culture, their religion, their family relations, as we Swedes and Europeans often tend to do. Our foreign minister was recently in Tanzania, in Dar es Salaam, and the only thing she wanted to talk about is democracy, women's rights, and climate change. These are important things. But if you don't have electricity, women's rights would be trampled on, because women will have to go and fetch wood and spend all their time finding wood and cooking with wood. That's not nice for women's rights. So that's what China doesn't do that. China respects the sovereignty and cultural diversity of other nations. If we have issues, we discuss them, but we have to start with what is common among us, what is our similarities, not our differences. So President Xi Jinping in the FOCAC summit in 2015, and this is a very important quote, is that he says that industrialization is an inevitable path of a country's economic success. Within a short span of several decades, China has accomplished what took developed countries hundreds of years to accomplish and put in place a complete industrial system with an enormous production capacity. That's number one. So you can watch China and learn. Number two, it's entirely possible for Africa as the world's most promising region in terms of development potential to bring into play its advantages and achieve great success. The achievement of inclusive and sustainable development in Africa hinges on industrialization, which holds the key to creating jobs, eradicating poverty, and improving people's living standards. We almost never hear European leaders say these things to Africans. And the Chinese say, we can assist you in providing what we have learned, the lessons we have learned, and the capacity we have developed. We can share it with you. The Chinese government, or President Xi Jinping, in one of his speeches, he said there are three bottlenecks, there are three problems in Africa. It's not the flaw of character of Africans. He said there are three bottlenecks of development in Africa. Shortage of capital, finance, shortage of skilled labor, and lack of infrastructure. These are the problems of Africa, according to the Chinese. So China said we can help with that. We know how to do that. So China has enormous surplus and credit capability, so provided in the first 3 years of the FOCA cooperation, $60 billion. This is mostly to state-owned large-scale infrastructure projects. Chinese banks also finance private Chinese companies outside for projects in Africa, industrial and other. Now, last year, also China pledged to allocate 60 billion new credit for infrastructure development. Now, the lack of skilled labor. Now, unlike the mythology we hear about how the Chinese work in Africa, that the Chinese only use Chinese workers, Chinese engineers. That's not true. Because Chinese workers and engineers have become expensive. I have news for you. You cannot take Chinese workers and ask them to work in Africa for cheap. So you have to develop the local labor with skill developments. And these are the ladies who are now running the Mombasa-Nairobi Railway. Many of them were educated for short, intensive courses in China, and now they run the railway system. I have in my book studies about how much Chinese and African involvement in the different projects are. I'm not going through that, but interestingly, China just surpassed Britain and the United States in the number of African students studying in Chinese universities. Only France is still ahead, and we know why. Okay, lack of infrastructure. As we have heard, but Africa has had visions of development. We have the latest plan from the 1982. But these have remained as visions. Why? Because Africa did not get the tools to implement these visions. This is the African highway network. What China is doing, China is not going to country and say, oh, you should build a railway from here to here. What China does is looks at a country's priority projects, which are already studied, and say, okay, you have these priorities, we can help you with this one, this one, this one. So China has pledged to help connect all the African capitals with high-speed railway, but that's starting out with the standard gauge railway. So this is an important, as we have seen, you cannot have free trade among African nations if you don't have transport. We have in a very short period, China managed to build some very important projects like the Djibouti Malaba Railway, but it's not only a railway going from A to B. This is part of Ethiopia's own national development plans. Ethiopia has 5-year development plans, a series of them. So this is an Ethiopian vision. China merely provided the tool for the Ethiopians to implement their vision. And these are industrial zones Ethiopia is intending to build, and they are connected to new universities. We had the Mombasa-Nairobi Railway. Mombasa-Nairobi Railway is already completed. Now there are projects to connect to this landlocked Central African countries and the Great Lakes nations. We also have the Lamu Port, Ethiopia, South Sudan project. This is part of the decades-old East African master plan of railway development, but it was never built. And there was no interest by Europe, the United States, or Japan to build these projects. We had also the completion of the Benguela Railway, and also extension to the Tanzania-Zambia Railway. This was also completed in 3 years. So I'm just taking these as examples of the development projects. We have the possibility, like we have in Europe, you can have a ship going all the way from the Black Sea across the Danube, Rhine, and Rhine River Canal. It's a very, very important transport route. Africa can actually, and I know people who are working on, Africans who are working on projects to connect the rivers and lakes of Africa, at least the Great Lakes. But also Egypt has a plan to have a river transport system going all along the Nile basin. But also, as I will show, there's another project to connect to the Congo River. these are crucial integration. Now, we have climate problems in Africa, it's undeniable. We have Lake Chad, which has shrunk due to climate change, whatever the reasons for that climate change are, but it's only 10% of its original size. And this has forced millions of people to move to other areas, creating crisis for other people around, because people live on fishing, grazing, animals, and they have to move. And we also have the terrorist problem emerging out of that. There has been a plan to refill Lake Chad by using a small portion of the water from the Congo River, by building a 2,000-kilometer canal, which will pick up water, build dams, and pick up water from the tributaries of the Congo River. This is the Congo River, but these are the tributaries. And it will flow with gravitation, you don't need to pump water, into the Chari River, Central Republic, and fill Lake Chad and create a new agro-industrial zone. There will be power generation, there will be transport corridors. So Congo, which is still opposed to the project, will be actually the most benefit. They will benefit most from this project. But these are political considerations that the DRC have to decide themselves. But last year, there was an agreement between a Chinese and Italian company, Bonifica and Hydro, to do a feasibility study of this. So this is an important aspect of Europe and China working in Africa. We also have the Grand Inga Dam, which is also in the Democratic Republic of Congo. But this project is approved by the government, but it has been waiting for financing and technological capability to build them. There's only one dam built, but this is a series of dams in this area of the Congo, which will, the largest hydropower plant in the world is the Three Gorges Dam in China. It generates 20,000 megawatts of power. The Grand Inga Dam will generate twice as much, 40,000 megawatts of power. This will be a revolution for power generation, industrialization for Congo and Congo's neighbors. Last year too, or earlier this year, a Spanish company went with the Chinese company to start the implementation of the first or the second one of these plants. So there are positive signs. The southern European countries who are closest to Africa are actively engaged in these kinds of projects. Now, this is also a shocking thing. We talk to Europeans. Africa needs nuclear power. Okay? Now we have people who say, "Oh, you should not build coal power. You should not allow China to build dirty coal power in your countries." Now, as an African official said in a conference on oil and gas in South Africa last month, he said that people are asking us not to use fossil fuel to produce electricity is not only immoral, but it could be criminal too. Because you will doom people to die for lack of electricity. So we don't advocate fossil fuels, because I think oil and gas should be used for industrial purposes, not to be burned as energy. It's not a smart way to do that. But nuclear power is the future of energy generation, both fission power and fusion power. And Africa has to start already now to join the big players in acquiring nuclear technology. This is a South African, a new technology developed in Germany, but the Germans abandoned it, so it's built it's a different technology than the nuclear power plants we have here. It's inherently safe. We have Egypt is building with Russia a new power plant, but most interestingly, Egypt started the first high school or junior school, gymnasium, for nuclear technology, advanced nuclear technology education. This is also built, you see it's desert still here. There are no trees, but it was built 2 years ago. And now you have like 300 students studying to become nuclear technology technicians. Many of them then will go to become nuclear technology engineers. So they are learning. These are some of the brightest students in Egypt. There are thousands who applied to the school. Only 70 were taken the first year. So they will have developed all the skills, and then they will work with the Russian. Already we have Egyptian engineers being educated in Russia, trained in Russia, because Russia will build a power plant similar to this in that part of Egypt. Now, we heard that there's Russia-Africa summit in Sochi, also last month. There were many nuclear technology agreements with African nations. Russia wants to, I think President Putin has a Light Africa initiative to provide nuclear know-how to African nations. This could sound very, very strange for a Swedish audience, talking about nuclear power in Africa. Not only nuclear power, we have to have space programs in Africa. Why not? Africa is the future of the world today. So rather than focusing on Africa's problems, we have to focus on the tools Africa needs. One paradoxical thing I found when I was writing my book is that the World Bank, the United States, and Britain were all ahead of China in the amount of money invested in Africa until 2015. The World Bank spends almost twice as China in Africa. But all that is wasted into small micro projects all over the continent. The United States and Britain invested more than China in Africa, but it was mostly focused on oil and gas and raw materials. China does invest in raw materials in Africa, but it invests equally in infrastructure building and manufacturing. So this is what is needed. This is where Sweden and Europe have to start thinking, because we are losing Africa, and the development pace will not be as quick as if we, Europe and Sweden, participate in this. This is the cover of my report. We have the Chinese guy there, but time is relative. Now we have the Africa 2063 agenda, but economic development is not linear. If you start to make these investments quickly, not only by China, but by Europe, by Sweden, into Africa, we will achieve many of these goals much faster than 2000. I think this is too far away in the future. But it will depend on the level of investment, the intensity of the investment in Africa. Then we can, as Einstein said, we can bend time and space. We can change our relationship to time and space with our creative interventions. So finally, I love this image. This is a true picture of Africa by night, taken by NASA satellites. And you can see the big difference in electrification. You have large parts of Africa dark. This is, I asked a friend to make he's an artist, that if all the projects we are discussing are built in Africa, how would Africa look by night? This is how Africa should look by night. Anyway, I don't know, Africa has enormous potential. We'll have the 3 billion people living in Africa, mostly young people under the age of 23. The average age in Germany is 49. So you have a complete different demographic. So this is a challenge, but it's also a great opportunity. And this is how we have to start thinking in Sweden about Africa and change the policy. Thank you very much.